are having this chat today with the World No Tobacco Day around the corner with Dr. Alan Ludowyke, who was till recently the chairman and CEO of the National Authority on Tobacco Alcohol. Welcome, Alan, to this conversation.
Thank you. Pleased to be.
Alan, so it's a really important position that you've held in the National Authority of Tobacco and Alcohol. We call it NATA, right? Is that the acronym that we use? Before I get into NATA, Alan, I'd love to know a little bit about you. You came out of the medical faculty in Sri Lanka in 1992 and started practicing as a doctor, right? When did you make the transition into medical administration, and how did that happen?
Yes, I started out working in the hospitals and subsequently specialized in medical administration along the line, and then moved into the ministry as a director subsequently. And my work with in international health then led to my working with international bodies such as the WHO. And
you were Director of International Health in the Ministry of Health since 2015. That's right.
So had a fair amount of experience dealing with the United Nations agencies.
Okay. And then when did you make the transition, Alan, to being chairman and CEO of NATA?
While I was holding my post, substantive post inside the ministry, I was appointed in January of 2003 to the post of chairman of NATA. And it includes both the chairman and CEO of a board.
So basically, the chairman also becomes the CEO of NATA. That's where the act is set up to do that.
Oh, yeah.
I must disclose my personal involvement in this. So I was on a presidential commission or committee, as we called it, on tobacco, alcohol, and dangerous drugs from 1998 to 2000. And during that presidential commission report actually recommended the creation of the National Authority on Tobacco Alcohol. We called it NATA in the report as well. But I think it was finally created 6 years later, in 2006. So maybe just so that everybody listening can understand, maybe Alan, you can tell us about how the objectives and mission of NATA is set out as well.
So NATA basically has a vision where we hope to have a country free of tobacco and alcohol use. But in truth, our mission is really to mobilize all the sectors of our society so that we can prevent people from using and abusing tobacco and alcohol.
You're not saying that NATA's objective is to ban these products, right?
They are a legal entity. They are entitled to do their business, but we are the regulators of the industry.
Right. Okay, so actually that's a very important thing. So NATA is effectively the regulatory authority or focal point for things to do with alcohol and tobacco, and has the interest of public health and maintaining sort of the industry in a way that is properly regulated. I think that's a nice way to kind of capture the objective of NATA.
Actually, our whole purpose is the enactment of the legal aspects for alcohol and tobacco control, and to basically to also prevent. The preventative aspect of it is also part of our mandate.
So gradually reducing the harmful health effects. So of course, if the health effect, so health is an important consideration.
Absolutely, because NATA works under the Ministry of Health, and thereby specifically with the non-communicable disease unit of the Ministry of Health, we have to closely ally our work, because the implementation of many of these harm done by tobacco and alcohol is part of the NCD work, and thereby we closely link with the ministry unit to carry out activities.
Alan, I'm aware that actually things like taxation policy are enormously connected to regulating tobacco and alcohol. So are you saying that you're only concerned with health, or would you be concerned with, is the regulator's mandate run on other aspects as well, like tax policy and other methods of control?
Absolutely. Yeah. because they are not only for policy recommendations, but the implementation and advocacy. We are to make recommendations to the government on all aspects of control. Taxes is one aspect of it, and an important aspect because it brings revenue to the government. So we have a working group that we formed during my tenure, where we work with the other stakeholders to try to come to a consensus on how best we could do the taxes, because the government is interested in revenue, and we would like to see the best way of doing this. Not only that it benefits the country, but also benefits the people.
So that's great. I want to switch back, Alan, to just think about your role as Director of International Health and ask if NATA itself, or these policies on tobacco and alcohol, and today we are focused more on tobacco because it's World No Tobacco Day around the corner, does that also have an international dimension? Is there some guidance that you have from a global perspective? Where does that come from? Or are we operating on our own in a way?
No, we are the fourth signatory to a framework convention for tobacco control, which we signed in 2003 as a country. And it basically means that we have to implement the articles of this treaty as far as possible. So NATA is the focal point for the implementation of the Framework Convention for Tobacco Control.
Okay. Thank you, Alan, because I remember in 2000, I think, or 1999, I was in Switzerland as a part of Sri Lanka's representation to create this Framework Convention on Tobacco and Alcohol. So tobacco control, FCTC, we call it. It's still called FCTC, right? So of course, I was not in the country after that, so it was great to see Sri Lanka becoming the fourth signatory. And later, then you're saying when NATA was formed, NATA was made the focal point of FCTC for Sri Lanka. So this is a global treaty?
Global treaty, one of the first and only treaties that we had at this time. But for health, recently we have a pandemic treaty as well. But that was the first public health treaty signed by 160 odd countries. Now it has increased to 170 odd countries. But it is one of those rare public health treaties that we have. And that really has brought together the global community to try and deal with the pandemic that we have, or the tobacco epidemic that we have.
So maybe that's worth focusing on then, right? If Sri Lanka was the fourth signatory to the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, it's the first global treaty on public health. NATA is the focal point. You were the director, the chairman and the CEO of NATA so from 2023 till when did you resign?
I stepped down at the end of January this year.
Okay, got it. So you till quite recently. Yes. So in that case, Alan, maybe we can talk about a little about how we are doing in this kind of, in reflecting our treaty obligations in what we do in Sri Lanka. One of the big debates today, and I think Verité has been involved in that debate, is also about how to do taxation. And I think we are guided, Alan, by Article 6 of the treaty on price and tax measures to reduce demand for tobacco, it's called, right? And there are several things about what each party should do. So it's both an effective way to gradually reduce the public health consequences of tobacco and how to use tax measures to do that. Is there anything in terms of the guidelines? Because I know that the FCTC publishes also the guidelines for the implementation of the treaty. So maybe some things you've learned from that process. What have you learned about, what's good practice and how is Sri Lanka doing and what you've been involved in that process?
Yes. So in Article 5.3, which basically, deals with interaction with the industry, it's very clear there are recommendations on how we interact with the industry. So it has to be done in a manner that is transparent, where we do not have meetings separate from the awareness that is out there for the public to know what we are putting on the table and what they are putting on the table. So because we have had legal cases between the industry and us, where they have taken NATA to court, we have had to interact with them. In fact, for the very first time, I have to say, we have won a court case that they took against us with flavored cigarettes. And that is, I think, a precedent. That a small country like ours have challenged the industry on having flavored cigarettes, which is actually against the act.
Alan, I picked up something in what you're saying. A small country like us won against them. So you see the tobacco industry not simply as a local industry, but as a global industry, is it? Tell us a little bit more. So you kind of see what is happening in Sri Lanka as part of a global power process?
Okay, that is why the FCTC is so important, because it brings together several countries. A small country like ours alone cannot handle this global industry. They operate globally. We have to work with the policy and the framework we have locally, but we have to think globally, because this is a global industry, a very powerful global industry. And they have resources that, enable them to have, influence on sometimes policy, on so many other, on the industry and the environment, local environment as well. So we feel that it is absolutely necessary that we interact with the other countries, not only within our region, but globally, because together we can take measures that will combat some of the harm that they say being done directly by their interference.
So what you're pointing out is that, being the regulator of, say, talk about tobacco for today, that you're not operating simply on your own resources, you're operating on a global guidance and a community empowered by a global public health treaty that also understands that the industry's particular methods that need to be regulated are also globally understood and studied. And so the global best practice is what you're reflecting.
Yeah.
So actually, the particular thing you cited about meeting tobacco, I saw that in Article 5, okay, which deals with governance and anti-corruption measures, really, right, in terms of that. And of course, this is a good time to talk about governance and anti-corruption as well. What else do they say about the meeting with the tobacco industry? Is it so? One is, you said that you shouldn't meet with the industry unless it is strictly necessary to enable effective regulation. And then is there any other guidance about transparency, since it's anti-corruption governance thing? And what would
the recommendations say that parties should interact with the tobacco industry only when and to the extent strictly necessary to enable them to effectively regulate the tobacco industry and tobacco products.
Okay.
The second is where interactions with the tobacco industry are necessary, as I cited earlier. Parties should ensure that such interactions are conducted transparently. So whenever possible, the interaction should be conducted in public.
Wow.
And for example, public exits and notices for these interactions will go to the public, and disclosure of the records of such interactions are also made public. So we have had meetings where the industry has requested in the Ministry of Health itself, in a additional secretary's office. And when they did take us to courts, we have had interactions also in that environment as well, with the Attorney General's Department that also supports us.
Yeah. So you've had to have these interactions because the court cases sometimes, and you've always made sure that it's with the Attorney General's office and others. It seems that, there's a little bit kind of, some things that we are learning as we go along. So what you're saying is technically there shouldn't be private meetings.
No, there can never be
with the tobacco industry.
With the tobacco industry, because that would leave us suspect to what our intent is, and it would also open, the door to the industry also, making allegations or insinuations about what took place between us. So these are all should be very transparent. After all, we are interested in public health. We are mandated to do that. We are responsible and accountable not only to the Ministry of Health but to the public.
Yeah. So I see three main things from what you read out, and maybe just see if I got it right. One, meetings should not happen unless they're strictly necessary. When they happen, as much as possible, they should be held in public so that anyone can participate and interact and contribute to the discussion. When it is not a public meeting and more restricted because of other necessities like court cases and things like that, then the records of such interactions should be available to the public, right? So those are the three things. One, don't have meetings unless necessary. Have meetings that are public and open to anyone and with notices for others to attend. And when that's also not possible, then make sure that there is records available that can disclose what happened at the meeting, which keeps everybody honest. I presume this is the goal of with industries that have a lot of power. So really good governance and anti-corruption measures. I think, Alan, it's interesting that I don't think the government has fully recognized this even in the past, or I don't know about the present, but I haven't seen a full understanding of this good governance and anti-corruption measure within government. And I suppose this is one of the tasks of NATA, to try and help government understand that. And maybe this is a great time to do that, because it is the time when there's a government committed to anti-corruption and good governance.
And there is now a new board and a new chair, and they are mandated to make recommendations to government, to advocate on behalf of these type of issues, so that the government can align themselves with what we are obliged to implement here through these conventions, and not only the convention, but a protocol of which we are also signatories to on the illicit trade on tobacco products. So there are many areas that still are left open for the government to bring about either policy or legislation.
So I must say, President Chandrika Kumaratunga, who appointed us into this committee, was being very progressive. Nothing we did, Alan, was really new. It was kind of aligning ourselves with the global, leadership in terms of how tobacco and alcohol are regulated. So banning advertising was, a clear thing that everybody else was doing, and globally there was advice on that. But I think she was good enough to sort of allow these recommendations that were so important and sort of, following global standards to be introduced into Sri Lanka through the report that we did. And it still took, I think, several years to build the public understanding, which then happened after our report in 2000 in the ensuing years. And then that kind of translated into, because the report recommended the creation of NATA into an act of parliament. So I think it's something that Sri Lanka has, as you're saying, taken leadership. But, one of these things that's interesting is that you can take leadership and still fall behind in implementation, right?
We have to create awareness among the public, so that they understand the importance of implementing some of these articles. Even things like, say, liability, of the industry when there are serious adverse events and consequences. Then also the environment, how we dispose of some of these products. So these are things that the public needs to know, and also we have to advocate for policy measures so that ultimately, if we do not have the legal enactments, it's very hard for implementation because we have authorized officers. Our authorized officers are public health inspectors, food and drug inspectors, excise officers, the police. Right. And then these officers also need to be empowered to do their job. Yes, NATA can authorize them, but they also have to carry it out. So implementation is absolutely important. And knowledge of all these people, not only the public and the government, but all our other stakeholders, has to be increased in order to really bear fruit for the future.
The reason I talk about implementation is because, after having pioneered the creation of the authority, the regulator, tobacco actually became increasingly affordable. Until about 2016, affordability was going up, not down. There was a major correction that happened in 2016, and that had a great deal to do with the tax policies. Right. And we noticed that this is in fits and starts. So, you have this period in which affordability increases, suddenly there's a correction, then it increases, there's a correction. There is no method by which affordability is kind of gradually reduced. I remember in 2014, Verité published an insight where we said, look, the taxation on tobacco should be based on some kind of rational formula. It should not be left to the discretion and vagaries of a minister to do it in an ad hoc way, which the law actually had left it that way. I know that got taken up, and where do you see that going? The whole idea that we must have a rational, systematic way of taxation. Yeah,
there are basic recommendations. I think we need to, when it comes to taxation.
Is there a formula adopted at the moment?
There is a formula.
Or is it formally adopted, or is it just that it's still ad hoc? Yeah,
we have been working because there have been formulas that have come and gone. In fact, NATA did recommend a formula in 2021, but that was not enacted. Basically, we have certain ideas of how we want it to be done.
Okay. What are the principles? Yeah. Okay.
Excise tax to a large share of the cigarette price. We need to rely on specific taxes, which
like a
see the inflation. So it has to be indexed with inflation. It also should be simple. At the moment, we have a complex structured plan because we have 5 tiers based on the length of the cigarette. Of course, one tier, the longest tier length is not produced. So there are 4 tiers. But that enables the industry to play games. Because the moment you increase the tax on one length, they can produce the other length, a shorter length, for example. Yeah. So we really need to have a very simple structure and have just one tier, ideally.
I suppose that has happened because the JPGL, John Player Gold Leaf, they called it, which was over 85% of the market in the last few years, has shrunk to just above 50% or around 50% of the market, while a much, much cheaper cigarette has expanded market share enormously.
Yeah, okay. So that is the very reason why we need to have a better.
So and it's relatively cheaper, no? That actually the tax per length is much lower for the cigarette, where the government is getting much less revenue.
Fortunately, even in our meetings with the Ministry of Finance Fiscal Policy, they still think about the affordability of this product, which in truth is not an essential food item.
But isn't the goal to reduce affordability gradually rather than increase affordability?
Relative to the essential food items, which had increased 3 or 4-fold, the cigarettes are still relatively affordable.
cheaper. So actually, it's the inflation on those the figure.
Price is controlled still by industry. Even though tax is assigned by the government, the price is controlled by industry. So tobacco taxes are, although only part of tobacco control, they are a very significant part because we know it has been proven, and we know that increasing taxes reduces consumption.
Right.
That is proven beyond.
In terms, first let's talk with price, then with tax. Okay. To reduce consumption, obviously price must go up. And I know that affordability has been going all over the place. And what you're saying is that the affordability has been that tobacco industry has effectively used the tax tiers to move people into different brands, and that there is no consistent way in which the different tiers are taxed. Or you think you should get rid of these tiers? But what's your recommendation?
Ideally, we would prefer that we got rid of the tiers.
Right.
And it made
Other countries that have done that?
obviously, yeah. Right. We are looking at examples, where they have done that. There are several countries, even in our region,
And they massively increased revenue, I think, by reducing the tiers. No?
It's really something that we hope that the government will take forward and look at in a very rational way, so that long term we can have a sustainable method in which we will raise taxes, so that there is a win-win situation.
Got it. And when we are setting taxes, Alan, is there some kind of benchmark of a tax? Now, one thing I have observed is that tax proportion of the price in a cigarette today is the lowest it has been in about 20 years. It's about 67, 69 or whatever. And even though, what is the best practice? So given that you're dealing with the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, WHO
recommendation for best practice is 75% of the retail price, right? So that is what ideally we would aim for.
So one thing I must say is that I'm glad to see as a reversal that the JPGL cigarette, which the affordability has come down in the last couple of years. I think after there was guidance from the IMF program as well on taxation. So, but what's interesting is that the taxes didn't go up, while, as you said, food prices went up by more than 100%. But tobacco prices didn't increase at the same rate as all the other food items in the country. So it's in the category of a substitution. But taxes increased even less than prices. So in a way, the government is losing revenue in this process, because when prices go up, obviously consumption comes down. If taxes don't go up at the same rate, then government doesn't actually get. So another interesting thing I think we saw in an article we published is since about 2017, while the tobacco company revenue from a cigarette, an average cigarette, increased by over 97%, government revenue from a cigarette increased by around 27-28%, right? So clearly there is a problem in our taxation approach. I mean, there was a problem in getting prices up, and now there's a problem with prices being okay on the costly cigarette, but not on the other cigarettes relatively. But then there's a taxation issue. So what are any other recommendations you make to government on taxation, and do they listen to you?
Yeah. So it was because of these issues that NATA formed the working group.
Okay.
To include both government, the Ministry of Finance, Fiscal Policy, the WHO. In fact, it involved the health, legal, and the health branches of the Secretariat there in Geneva. We involved them with their input, and they actually sent the team down to meet with us and the Ministry of Finance. We have brought in our other stakeholders as well, because we want to achieve a consensus as to a good formula, a simulation model where we can show how the increase in price or the increase in taxes will work out in the end for the benefit of the government revenue, which obviously the IMF too is interested in. So we have even spoken to the IMF. Unfortunately, initially they did not speak to NATA, although we are to be the focal point, but we knew they were interested in tobacco taxation, and we contacted them, and they also came and met with us, and we gave our recommendations to them, and they were interested.
But that must have been after the policy was formulated, no? So quite recently, because I didn't see in the IMF recommendations to the government NATA's inputs reflected when they were done in 23, for instance. But 24, you're saying you were able to
meet with them and give our recommendations as well. And they were interested, and they wanted to be kept informed also as to any changes that we...
Alan, this is really interesting, because what you're effectively saying is NATA is the regulator for tobacco policy in the country. It works not in isolation, but in a global community connected to a treaty called the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And there's a global body that is actually helping advise and guide what the policy should be for taxation, and with the WHO's massive involvement. So 75% tax in price is one benchmark we are missing now by a long shot, you're saying. And also regularly updating the prices, removing the number of bans of cigarettes. That these are all policies that come out of and I know there are more, but maybe we can talk about another day. But that what you're arguing is that NATA should be a focal point for actually making these decisions. That decisions mustn't bypass the regulator, which they may have been doing in the past. But I think what I heard you say last was that, or before, was that there's a governance and anti-corruption element to all this. And that involves not that any government official shouldn't be meeting with the industry unless strictly necessary. They should be making those meetings happen in public with disclosure and opportunity for others to join the meetings. And when that's also not possible, they should be disclosing records of those meetings. Alan, how do you see the way forward? Do you see us being able to achieve some of these things? And how do you want to speak to government or, the leadership in NATA, like on WHO? How do what is the task forward? Because I feel I don't know whether we are 100% there, 50% there. Where are we in this process, and how would you suggest we move forward? Yeah.
Actually, if you look at our country regionally, we are doing well. We have done well. We have actually, in many aspects, implemented a lot of the articles, a lot of that. But there is still gaps that need the support of government. And it's not just the health ministry alone. It involves, as I had pointed out, so many other ministries. In fact, even our 14-member board reflects that, because it has the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Justice, Sports, the police, the excise department. So there are all these stakeholders that have to come together. So the way forward is for all of these stakeholders to also understand where we can work together and be on the same page. Because if we do not agree on one policy going forward, and it's the same for tax, unless we create a consensus and all are on the same page, industry can always point out and say, oh, you don't agree. There is no consensus. So let's do it this way, and it also lends sort of confusion to the government as to the way forward. So that's where I believe when NATA has a focal point and having the secretariat for this framework convention in Geneva, which is supporting us, if we can bring all these people together and then go forward, that with oneness of mind, that is very important. And I really I hope that in the future they will work together. The various stakeholders will work together, including government, in taking forward what is really a very important issue when it comes to public health.
So we have really done well in setting up a regulator, setting up laws for actions on regulating the industry, including signage. I know there have been things, and you all want a court case on flavored cigarettes, things like that. But what you're saying is on more contentious issues like discretion on setting taxes. Actually, that's a huge debate. The IMF has also advised removing discretion on taxes, having a proper formula, reducing, and then even on the governance anti-corruption measures, you're saying we need consensus across government, which suggests that it is, in Sri Lanka, it seems the only way to get consensus across ministries is for the president to step in. But do you feel there's a role for the president to take an active interest? I know that in 2015 to 19, that actually this has been led by the president often when it succeeded, in 2000s.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So leadership, we all know, is very important in issues such as this. And since it is concerning the public, it's not some locally, a local issue. It's a national issue. It's a global issue. We need leadership from the top.
Alan, thank you so much for joining this chat. Great to talk to you, and all the best in the work that you're doing. So much on tobacco control. Take care. Bye.